Canon of Erith. People of Prythonia. Line of succession of the Prythonian throne. Ulter the Undrigan, 1 Pa, 10 Pa. Ulter was the first man to hold the throne of Prythonia. Ulter began life as the son of a lesser noble, Drogon of Penwydren, and assumed the mantle of Baron of Penwydren upon his father's death in 16 AH. At the time that he took up the throne of Penwydren, his territory was beset by enemies on all sides. Ulter set about immediately launching attacks on his neighbors, staging lightning raids into enemy territory and savagely murdering the nobles and their families within enemy lands. As each new territory fell to Ulter's men, another would capitulate and join his side, hoping to ally with the young upstart and thus avoid his bloody reprisals. Where Drogon of Penwydren had been a statesman and a man of peace who abhorred violence, Ulter believed in strength and had no qualms about using violence, shock, and awe to achieve his ends. His methods were so unlike his father's that men began to refer to him as the Undrigan. Ulter liked this title and embraced it, making it the official name of his household. Corruption and hubris were the order of the day within the noble houses of Prythonia at the time, and Ulter found himself supported by the druids and bards of the learned brotherhood as soon as he started cleaning house. Ulter was gifted the great magic sword known as Callid Bolg, and used its terrible powers to increase his already impressive martial prowess and smite those who would dare to stand against him. Some legends say this sword was handed to him by a god, others that it was crafted by the druids, and still others that it was enchanted by the being now known as the Wild Man of the Weald. For 16 years, Ulter and his armies campaigned across Prythonia, accepting oaths of fealty from some nobles and dispatching those who refused. He drove Hestalian, Mercian, Galatian, and Thanaton invaders from his lands in some of the fiercest and bloodiest battles Prythonia would see until the onset of the Gods' War. His armies are said to have never lost a battle, and the Undrigan is said to have personally dispatched enough foes to form a new country in Hell. Once all of Prythonia was united beneath his iron fist, Ulter declared himself king and returned to Penwydren to rule. The druids of the Learned Brotherhood continued to support Ulter and invented a new calendar to track his reign, referring to dates prior to his kingship as ante-Adonatio, or before unification, and to those following this event as post-Adonatio, or after unification. Despite his bloody rise to power, Ulter's reign was one of peace and prosperity. Order was enforced brutally, by his veteran forces, but the folk were free to trade without fear of bandit, raider, or beast. A noted scholar of the time wrote, "Under the Undrigan a man has two choices. He may love and obey his king and thus enjoy a peaceful and prosperous life in this Prythonian paradise. Or, he may be ground up into meat for the king's dogs." Ulter held the throne of Prythonia for 10 years, passing the title to his son Cedwyn following a fatal injury suffered while hunting boar. Cedwyn Undrigan, 10 Pa, 26 Pa. Following the death of Ulter the Undrigan, his young son Cedwyn assumed the throne of Prythonia. Though Cedwyn was talented both as a statesman and a warrior, his father's conquests had left many of the nobles unhappy with their lot in life, and Cedwyn's rule was beset with troubles from the outset. A half-dozen nobles revolted within a moon of Cedwyn taking the throne, and all of his attempts at diplomacy fell on deaf ears. Cedwyn was forced to use military force to bring the nobles in line, and spent the first 4 years of his reign trying to regain control of the eastern coastal provinces which were backed by Galatia. After an exhausting campaign along the eastern coast, Cedwyn's armies were weakened and the Galati saw this as an opening to capture Prythonian land. From 14 Pa until 22 Pa, Cedwyn's forces were stuck in an endless meat grinder against the constant stream of Galatian invaders and their Mercian sellswords. Eventually, Cedwyn's forces prevailed and the Galati gave up the fight, but the cost was high. Cedwyn's armies had been decimated and many smaller villages had been abandoned or destroyed in the fighting. The peace and security his father had established had already passed, as bandits and raiders plagued the countryside in the vacuum left by Cedwyn's many drafts. The rest of Cedwyn's reign was spent arguing with his nobles in the Widden, bargaining and compromising with his vassals in a vain attempt to re-establish some semblance of order in his kingdom. In 26 Pa, the weight of trying to bear his father's legacy finally overtook Cedwyn and he took his own life. The crown of Prythonia then passed to his younger brother Uric. Uric Undrigan, 26 Pa, 37 Pa. Uric Undrigan assumed the throne in 26 Pa following the suicide of his older brother, Cedwyn. During Cedwyn's reign, Uric had focused primarily on trade and commerce, amassing quite a bit of wealth and influence within a kingdom which wasn't directly tied to the throne. He had also been quietly attentive and knew where the roots of treason and insurrection were taking hold. With a great many allies and friends who operated in the shadows, Uric quickly began to weed these roots out as soon as he took the throne. From 26 Pa to 28 Pa, he dispatched assassins throughout his own kingdom, killing off those nobles he knew would not be loyal to his throne. The Witan protested, and in late 28 Pa he called to meet with them in the public house of Penwydran. With the entire Witan assembled save those few he knew were loyal, he ordered his men to barricade the public house and burn it to the ground. This conclave of ashes cemented those who remained in power to his will. Uric's reign continued as it had begun, and dozens of other nobles, merchant princes, and even foreign nobles fell under the blades of his assassins throughout his time on the throne. He grew increasing paranoid as time passed and more assassins were dispatched for thinner and thinner causes. In 37 Pa, Uric was stabbed to death as he slept in his bed by a servant called Connor, whose father, Galamar, Uric had burned alive in the conclave of ashes. Connor Galamar declared himself king of Prythonia, and nobody bothered to defend the Undrigan claim to the throne. Connor Galamar, 37 Pa, 51 Pa. Connor Galamar took the throne of Prythonia in 37 Pa after stabbing his predecessor Uric Undrigan to death in his sleep. While none of the nobles of the time had any love for King Uric, many also did not care for some commoner sitting on the throne. Talks of rebellion and uprising spread for a time, but the Cathmorgan invasion of 39 Pa forced the nobles to delay these plans and unite with royalist forces for mutual defense. The Prythonians battled the Cathmorgan hordes from 39 Pa throughout the rest of Connor's reign. While they initially had little faith in Connor, the people of Prythonia came to love and respect their king, who turned out to be a benevolent ruler, a brilliant strategist, and a formidable warrior. When Connor fell in battle in 51 Pa, he was publicly mourned by his people, and his son, Ewan the Elder, assumed the throne. Ewan the Elder, 51 Pa, 76 Pa. Ewan the Elder of Galamar took the throne in 51 Pa after his father fell in battle against the Cathmorgan invaders. The Cathmorgan War was still in full swing, and Ewan had been studying their tactics and logistics for years as his father led the defense efforts against them. Ewan quickly secured an alliance with King Christoval of Hystalia, who was likewise suffering under Cathmorgan threat. In his studies, Ewan had surmised that the Cathmorgan were near unstoppable on land, and devised a plan to strike the soft underbelly of the Cathmorgan threat. He loaded small corps of elite warriors and embarked to Cathmoria, while his Hystalian allies used the full weight of their considerable navy to make concentrated attacks on Cathmorgan ships and ports. In 59 Pa, Ewan personally led his forces to Magmoira, where he was quickly able to capture the poorly defended settlement. Ewan challenged the king of the Cathmorgan to a duel, which he won, and by which right he was declared king of Cathmoria. He married Queen Enya to seal the deal and ordered all Cathmorgan warriors returned home, ending the conflict that had raged for the past 20 years. Ewan returned home with his new wife and enjoyed a relatively peaceful and happy rule for the remainder of his time on the throne. Ewan died of consumption in 76 Pa, passing his throne to his son, Ewan the Younger. He retained kingship of Cathmoria until his passing, at which point Cathmoria once again became independent of Prythonian rule. Ewan the Younger, 76 Pa, 89 Pa. Ewan the Younger of Galamar ascended the throne in 76 Pa following the death of his father. With the widespread damage caused by the previous 20 years of war, Ewan the Younger focused primarily on civic projects and trade with his Hystalian allies to help rebuild the nation of Prythonia. His rule was peaceful, as most of the country had seen enough of war. Ewan the Younger abdicated the throne to his son Lugh Galamar when his health began to fail in 89 Pa and died 10 years later in 99 Pa. Lugh Galamar, 89 Pa, 106 Pa. Lugh Galamar ascended to the throne with the abdication of his father, Ewan the Younger, in 89 Pa. The early part of his rule was peaceful and prosperous, as trade with Hystalia, Aramis, and Galatie flourished. In 97 Pa, however, the forces of Lord Penrhys and his unholy hordes landed on the western coast of Prythonia and began conquering settlement after settlement, throwing Prythonia into a bloody war with the invaders. Penrhys was a noted necromancer, and the nation soon found itself beset by an army of the undead, with Penrhys' forces growing at every battle, whether they won or lost. The war raged until 106 Pa, when Lugh and Penrhys met face to face on the field of battle, and Lugh slew Penrhys with the great sword Caled Bolg. Penrhys' hordes collapsed into true death or fled for Albion with his defeat, but the toll of fighting the great necromancer left King Lugh racked with disease and pestilence. He died only 3 days later of these blights, leaving his son, Cothvith, to take the throne. Cothvith Galamar, 106 Pa, 118 Pa. Cothvith Galamar became king of Prythonia following the death of his father in 106 Pa. Inheriting a kingdom which had been devastated by dark sorcery, Cothvith immediately set about encouraging his people to absolve themselves of the arcane. Having witnessed the dark powers of Lord Penrhys and his undead hordes, the Prythonian people were eager for revenge and quickly set about murdering and butchering witches and wizards within their ranks, both real and imagined. Cuthved's bloody reign was a time where even the smallest village would be marked by bodies burnt at the stake or hung from the neck for any suspicion of witchcraft. By 118 Pa, the true wizards and witches of Prythonia had enough and formed a pact to remove Cuthved from power. A wizard called Cunwulf Medryn led his pact against Cuthved and captured the palace. Befitting his treatment of the arcane of Prythonia, Cunwulf had the king bound to a stake and burned alive. A few weeks later, the Witan declared Cunwulf to be king of Prythonia. Cunwulf Medryn, 118 Pa, 149 Pa. Cunwulf Medryn became king of Prythonia in 118 Pa, after burning his predecessor, Cuthved Galamar, at the stake. Being a wizard of some renown and having a great many powerful arcanists in his favor, Cuthved commissioned both the Lion Crown of Prythonia and the Lion Throne of Prythonia in 119 Pa. The crown was completed in 120 Pa and the throne in 122 Pa. Cunwulf's reign was one of peace, though with all the country had been through in the previous few rules, it was also a time of great famine, disease, and poverty. Cunwulf worked diligently to bring health and prosperity back to his people, and by the time he died of old age in 149 Pa he had made great strides in this direction. Cunwulf had no sons, so his daughter Sindra Medryn ascended the Lion Throne upon his death. Sindra Medryn, 149 Pa, 158 Pa. Sindra Medryn became queen of Prythonia following her father, Cunwulf Medryn's, death in 149 Pa. Sindra was protested by many of the nobles of Prythonia, both because she was a woman and because she was of advanced age, but she ignored these complaints and continued on her father's work. Throughout her 9-year reign, she completed an astounding number of civil projects and funded a wide variety of trade ventures, bringing wealth back to the people of Prythonia and rebuilding its armies to proof the nation against future invasions. Sindra Medryn died of old age and generally failing health in 158 Pa, having never married or borne heirs. She left instructions that her personal bodyguard, Ethelbar der Saik, should take the throne following her death, and her wishes were eventually carried out. Ethelbar I, 158 Pa, 168 Pa. Ethelbar der Saik began life as a Mercian sellsword who eventually came into the employ of Queen Sindra Medryn and showed enough skill and loyalty that he would become her personal bodyguard and general of her armies. When Sindra's old age took her in 158 Pa, she instructed that Ethelbar be appointed king of Prythonia. The Witan initially declined and a dozen other men began making their bids for the throne. Ethelbar was undeterred and used ancient customs to challenge each and every one of these men for the right to the throne. Ethelbar slew 8 of these men in single combat, and the remaining 4 abandoned their claims rather than face him. Thus, Ethelbar I ascended the throne of Prythonia in 158 Pa, and his people quickly dubbed him Ethelbar the Butcher. Despite this ominous epithet, Ethelbar was a kind and benevolent leader and ruled with little bloodshed. He continued Queen Sindra's work, with a heavy focus on rebuilding Prythonia's armies and repairing its fortifications in case of future invasions. Ethelbar had long been a proponent of a more centralized capital, and moved the Prythonian capital from Penwydran to Nalsex in 165 Pa. Ethelbar I was not a young man when he took the throne, and he abdicated to his son, Ethelbar II, in 168 Pa when his eyesight began to fail him. He perished only a year later in 169 Pa due to failure of the heart. Ethelbar II, 168 Pa, 187 Pa. Ethelbar II ascended the Lion Throne following the abdication of his father in 168 Pa. Like his predecessor, Ethelbar II was a military man and continued to work on the restoration and expansion of the Prythonian military. By 171 Pa, he had secured a large enough army and navy that he felt confident to launch a war against his Galatian neighbors. He quickly captured the Isle Ental and Eretare, and continued pushing eastward onto the Galatian mainland. King Jean LeBlanc of Galatie was no pushover, however, and the two nations quickly got bogged down in a brutal stalemate. Ethelbar II refused to abandon his efforts, and continued to pour more and more resources into the fight, earning him the epithet Ethelbar the Ambitious. The war raged on until Jean LeBlanc died in battle in 178 Pa, and his successor, Jean Le Petit, sued for peace. Ethelbar II negotiated the surrender, which included Galatie relinquishing any claims to Ental and Eretare as well as paying considerable tariffs on all shipping through the Galatian Sea, but which failed to secure any mainland territory for Prythonia. The rest of Ethelbar II's reign was spent quashing minor rebellions and arguing with the Witan, as a great many nobles had sacrificed a great many men and resources for Galatian land that they never saw. Ethelbar II died in his sleep in 187 Pa and was succeeded by his son Ethelbar III. Ethelbar III, 187 Pa, 247 Pa. Ethelbar III assumed the throne of Prythonia in 187 Pa following the death of his father, Ethelbar II. Unlike his predecessors, Ethelbar III was a student of magic, particularly fond of the dark art of demonology. His reign began with cold indifference to the suffering of his people and only got worse as time passed. Demonic rituals in which citizens would be sacrificed to his dark powers became commonplace. His people called him Ethelbar the Unholy, and unspeakable atrocities occurred under his decrees on a daily basis. This led to a large portion of the population rebelling, and a great many bandit kings and would-be usurpers rose up against him, only to be quashed with unholy powers and demonic soldiers. Ethelbar's dark entreaties allowed him to live an unnaturally long life, and it seemed that the suffering of his people would go on indefinitely. In 242 PA, however, a young noble called Eldrin of Penwydren rose to prominence. He possessed the charisma and presence to inspire men to stand against their unholy king and gathered a following that sent ripples of rebellion throughout the land. Most notably, he drew the attention of Lawan of Sherid's Weald, a notable bandit king who had been fighting against Ethelbar III's men for nearly 20 years. As Eldrin's following grew, Ethelbar became increasingly paranoid, throwing all manner of men and dark creature against them only to continually have them torn apart by Lawan's shadow men. In 247 PA, Ethelbar's paranoia and overconfidence got the better of him and he personally led an attack against Lawan at Sherid's Weald. Before they even reached the field of battle, Lawan snuck into Ethelbar's camp at night and beheaded him in his sleep. With their master dead, Ethelbar's unholy servants were banished to the Elder Night. Lawan and Eldrin attacked only a few hours later, butchering Ethelbar's entire army while they were still reeling from the loss of their liege. Lawan's shadow men tore into the army from every side, raining deadly hails of arrows from the treetops. Those who fled found themselves quickly run down and slaughtered by Eldrin's cavalry. Eldrin then declared himself king of Prythonian, with the full support of the Witan and remaining nobles. Eldrin I, 247 PA, 252 PA. Eldrin I claimed the Lion Throne following the assassination of his predecessor, Ethelbar III. While he was seen as a benevolent and capable leader, there remained those nobles who were still loyal to the demonic cults established by his predecessor. Eldrin endured no less than a dozen assassination attempts, and finally succumbed to one in 252 PA when he was poisoned at the wedding of his daughter, Helda. His son, Eldrin II assumed the throne following his death. Eldrin II, 252 PA, 275 PA. Eldrin II became king of Prythonia following the assassination of his father, Eldrin I, in 252 PA. His first order of business was to give the learned brotherhood carte blanche to eliminate the disease of demonic cults within their society. They were more than happy to do so, and a great purge occurred from 252 PA until 258 PA. While the Druids' methods were brutal, they were also reportedly quite well informed and focused, and few instances of unjust persecution were recorded. Many of the locals saw the Druids as their saviors and King Eldrin II by extension. The Prythons were all too happy to be rid of the dark powers that had loomed over them for so many years, and began calling their king, Eldrin the Emancipator. Their gratitude caused resurgence in the old faith, and a great wave of religious renewal spread throughout the kingdom. Eldrin II went on to revivify his nation by encouraging an influx of new settlers from Galatie, where a massive civil war had produced a great many refuges. While this helped bolster dwindling populations and provided much-needed labor in many smaller settlements, there were those in his court who opposed such policies. In 275 PA, Eldrin II was struck down by one of his own guards whilst enjoying a quiet country ride. He was succeeded by his son, Eldrin III. Eldrin III, 275 PA, 287 PA. Following the assassination of his father, Eldrin II, Eldrin III assumed the Lion Throne in 275 PA. Many expected him to bring harsh reprisals against those who conspired to kill his father, but it turned out that he was amongst those unhappy with the Galatian immigration and let the matter quietly be forgotten. He instead set about passing edicts which made Galatie immigrants slaves to the local lords under whose rule they lived, and ushered in a period of suffering and misery for these poor unfortunate souls. Since most of the nobles profited greatly off of this policy, there were very few who stood against it. His most vocal opponent was his own daughter Elsie, who spent a good deal of her time and energy stirring the rabble and whatever nobles would listen up against her father. While it is unclear whether Eldrin III orchestrated the attack, his son Eldrin IV made an attempt on his sister's life, only to fail and instead perish on the end of her own blade. Elsie declared, by ancient right, that since she had slain her brother, his name became hers and began calling herself Elsie Eldrin IV. The Cathmorgan tribes, who had been increasingly paranoid that they may be the next slave folk of Prythonia, rallied to her cause, and in 284 PA, Elsie Eldrin IV led a small army of Cathmorgan mercenaries and Galatie freedom fighters against her father. Eldrin III found it quite difficult to face Elsie's guerrilla fighters with a conventional army and foolishly began to attempt to conscript Goa'uld and Murtani citizens as slave soldiers, which only caused more men to flock to Elsie's banner. By the time Elsie's forces reached Eldrin III's palace in 287 PA, she was informed that the nearby Murtani tribe had already captured, killed, and eaten her father. Elsie Eldrin IV ascended the throne and her Cath Morgan followers spent the next 3 years carrying Eldrin III's bones from town to town in Prythonia so the locals could spit and urinate on the remains of their former king. Elsie Eldrin IV, 287 PA, 298 PA. Elsie Eldrin IV ascended the throne in 287 PA following the death and cannibalization of her father, Eldrin III, at the hands of the Murtani tribes he had attempted to enslave. Elsie immediately decreed that all slaves be set free and a great many of her nobles protested. Elsie found a simple solution, simply to name these disloyal nobles outlaws and decree that any man who killed them would rightfully inherit their wealth and position. For the next several years, peasant uprisings resulted on a local scale, as one corrupt lord after another was killed by disgruntled peasants who then took their titles and lands. While the peasantry loved their queen, her policies upset a great many of the old blood nobles who had supported her father. Numerous attempts were made on her life to no avail, and at least 4 would-be assassins found themselves skewered by the queen herself. In 298 PA, however, a man called Lannis of Silao managed to kill Queen Elsie Eldrin IV and declared himself king of Prythonia. Lannis the Usurper, 298 PA, 307 PA. Lannis of Silao ascended the Lion Throne after murdering his predecessor, Queen Elsie Eldrin IV in 298 PA. While Lannis had great wealth and thus a sizable contingent of mercy and sellswords, he lacked support from the other nobles of Prythonia, the Widden, and even the other merchant princes of the kingdom. He was quickly dubbed Lannis the Usurper and spent his entire rule fighting a massive war against the nobles who were ostensibly under his control. Elsie Eldrin IV's son, Eldrin V, had escaped into hiding following his mother's execution, and despite all Lannis' best efforts was able to survive and gather strong support for his claim to the throne. Eldrin and a coalition of Prythonian nobles laid siege to Nalsex in 306 PA. By early 307 PA, the people of Nalsex were starving and grew tired of Lannis' refusals to capitulate. One of the Mercian generals under Lannis' command, Helmut de Grunbart, dragged Lannis up to the castle walls and unceremoniously tossed him over in a gesture of surrender. Eldrin V took the throne in 307 PA with near unanimous support of the Widden. Eldrin V, 307 PA, 318 PA. Eldrin V ascended the Lion Throne in 307 PA following the death of his predecessor, Lannis the Usurper. While he had been a skilled tactician and strategist, Eldrin had neither the heart nor the head for kingship. He relied heavily on his advisor, the magician Meldrin Mar, and involved himself in matters of state as little as possible. The nobles dubbed him, Eldrin the Absent, as they were more often than not left to deal with Meldrin rather than with their king. As his age advanced, Eldrin grew even less concerned with kingship and abdicated the throne in 318 PA, after which he sailed off to Gallity to never be seen again. The Widden had come to respect Meldrin Mar, and quickly confirmed him as king of Prythonia. Meldrin Mar, 318 PA, 332 PA. Meldrin Mar became king of Prythonia in 318 PA, following Eldrin V's abdication of the throne. Having long served as advisor to the king and performing many of his kingly duties, the nobles quickly began referring to him as the hitherto and still king. Meldrin's early reign was largely without incident, though a major Thanodon incursion began in 326 PA. Meldrin led a concerted effort to eradicate the Thanodon invaders, but the small-scale, hit-and-run raids they perpetrated made it difficult to bring any reasonable amount of force against them. Meldrin Mar died in battle in 332 PA, to the axe of the Thanodon leader, Roald Svengerson. Roald Svengerson, 332 PA, 391 PA. Roald Svengerson slew his predecessor, Meldrin Mar, in battle in early 332 PA, and continued rampaging through a kingless Prythonia to claim its throne later that year. Roald's men purged the land of most of its existing nobles, particularly those of Prythonic blood, and he installed many of his own Thanodon men in these positions of power. While there initially was an outcry against the Thanodon rulership, his reign brought trade from the north and east and ushered in a period of previously unknown prosperity for the Prythonian people. Roald's law was fair, his taxes low, and his punishments severe. The people quickly learned to toe the line, preferring to quietly endure the minor inconveniences of Thanodon rule than to face the brutal reprisals of their king. Roald ruled unopposed until 391 PA, when word reached him of a man named Sweyn ap Rylan who had established his own independent stead and refused to pay homage to his king. Several forces were sent against Sweyn and his men, and each was dispatched to the man. Eventually King Roald himself rode against Sweyn, and like his generals before him, he was cut down by swaying. Artax the Elder, 393 Pa, 425 Pa. After the death of King Roald Svengerson at the hands of Sweyn ap Rhuilan, the nobles fell to infighting over the throne, leaving it vacant until 393 Pa. In this year, a Galati warlord by the name of Artax Caturix finally won out and claimed the throne. Despite being a skilled and vicious warrior, Artax the Elder was also a competent statesman and a scholar. He instituted Prythonia's Code of Laws and Justice, created the first official guilds for merchants and artisans, and established a series of foreign embassies in the surrounding nations to forward trade and international politics. Artax ruled in peace and prosperity, beloved by his people, until he died of old age in 425 Pa. Artax's body was carried throughout Prythonia and mourned at each settlement, before finally being interred along the Aryan Toll at Ildres. Artax the Younger, 425 Pa, 451 Pa. When Artax the Elder died in 425 Pa, he was succeeded by his son, Artax the Younger. While Artax was a skilled leader in his own right, he lacked the charisma and force of presence that his father possessed, and he found himself taxed with trying to maintain the systems his father had put in place. In 433 Pa, the pirate queen known as Red Lyn Macragge rose with her Red Brotherhood and conquered Innis trade, founding the citadel of Caerleon. Her pirates quickly wrested control of the oceans from the Prythonian navy, and trade with foreign powers began to falter as Artax was perceived as too weak to maintain control of his nation. Red Lyn raided coastal settlements and shipping until her death from calamity in 436 Pa. While her passing didn't stop the Red Brotherhood, it decentralized control and made them significantly less difficult to deal with. Artax, however, never had time to capitalize on this, as the Ahriman Empire invaded in 438 Pa. Artax put up a valiant defense, but simply could not compete with the numbers, technology, and tactics of the Ahriman legions. Artax capitulated to Emperor Quintus Ambrosius Atratus in 441 Pa. Prythonia became a province of the Ahriman Empire, and Artax was allowed to remain on the throne as a servant of the emperor until his death in 451 Pa. Titus Quintus Atratus, 451 Pa, 474 Pa. Following the death of Artax the Younger in 451 Pa, the throne of Prythonia transferred to the Ahriman Emperor as per the armistice reached with the Prythonian capitulation in 441 Pa. Thus, Emperor Titus Quintus Atratus became the king of Prythonia and ruled from Aramis, installing governors to handle the province directly. He moved the capital to Capella to facilitate foreign rule. These governors showed varying levels of benevolence and competence, but were largely beneficial for the folk of Prythonia. Roads and schools were built throughout the land, standing armies provided unprecedented security to even the smallest settlements, and laws were simple and fairly implemented. Mithra's worship arrived in Prythonia, bringing with it various monastic orders which greatly advanced a large number of scholastic and cultural arts within Prythonia. While resentment of the Ahriman folk was initially high, the ability for a common serf to improve his lot in life with citizenship through military service kept dissension low. Titus Quintus Atratus was killed on campaign in Media in 474 Pa, and the throne of Aramis, and thus Prythonia, passed to his son Salamis Titus Atratus. Salamis Titus Atratus, 474 Pa, 524 Pa. Salamis Titus Atratus became emperor of Aramis and, by extension, king of Prythonia in 474 Pa following the death of his father Titus Quintus Atratus. Salamis was possessed of a fierce hatred of the Median people who had staunchly resisted Ahriman rule and were responsible for the death of his father. Salamis began to throw all of his forces, resources, and energy into the conquest of Media, leaving the fringes of his empire, including Prythonia, with little support or funding. In Prythonia, raiders both foreign and domestic began rising with alarming regularity, and the local governors were unable to raise the funds and troops necessary to defend the nation. The Sorrentine papacy instead took charge, dispatching Templars to rule local settlements and enforce law, which quickly resulted in various witch trials and open combat between Mithras and pagans. Emperor Salamis' son, Salamis Atratus, arrived in 502 Pa and immediately set about trying to right the wrongs of his father's neglect. He quickly became a favorite of the Prythonian people and brought a good measure of peace to the land. That is until 522 Pa, when a massive invasion of Thanodun and Niborian forces landed on the northern shores of Prythonia with Red at their heels, marking the beginning of the Gods' War. Salam immediately rallied the people of the nation and entreated Vaishya and her allies to help him and led a valiant defense against the unholy invaders. In 524 Pa, Salamis Titus Atratus was slain by Shaitan in Media and rulership passed to Salamis Atratus. Salamis Atratus, 524 Pa, 529 Pa Salamis Atrutus became emperor of Aramis and king of Prythonia in 524 Pa with the death of his father Salamis Titus Atrutus. Salam was already embroiled in a war with Rad's hosts in Prythonia and continued to focus on that front. He fought at the front lines of the battles against Rad's forces at the side of Asia and landed the killing blow against Rad herself in 529 Pa. While this brought the gods' war to an end and brought out the armistice between the gods which would be known as the Diminishing, it had disastrous consequences for Salam and his empire. The blood of the Dark Goddess had poisoned Salam when he slew her, and he passed less than a week later in extreme agony. The Arman Empire, weakened by both his predecessors' actions and the gods' war, collapsed with word of his death. It is said that the goddess Vaishya wept at the death of Salam, and the tree known as the Vaishyadali outside of his tomb in a barrel is said to have sprung up from this tear. The Florentine papacy was quick to name Salam a saint upon his death, and would later bestow the same honor to his four closest companions. Pope Romulus III assumed regency over Prythonia until a proper king could be appointed. Pope Romulus III, 529 Pa, 536 Pa. While not technically king, Pope Romulus III ruled as regent of Prythonia from the death of Salam in 529 Pa until the appointment of King Bertrand I in 536 Pa. Romulus' rule was largely focused on rebuilding Prythonia as a Mithrace state. With Vaishya, handmaiden of Mithrace, having fought for these very people, and the fear of the pagan gods building in the local population, it was quite easy for a large portion of its folk to be converted to Mithrace during this period. Bertrand I, 536 Pa, 564 Pa. Bertrand I was appointed king of Prythonia in 536 Pa by Pope Romulus III, who had previously held regency over the land. Bertrand I was, by all accounts, a sycophant with little ambition or ability of his own and was largely regarded as a puppet of the Florentine papacy. He became known as Bertrand the Beggar and was widely disliked by the nobles in his court. Bertrand I's reign was marked with Mithracist expansion, bloody witch hunts against the pagans of the land, and a great many small-scale revolts. Bertrand was beheaded at his own court by Baron Georg Undrigen after the king's witch hunts had resulted in the death of Undrigen's wife and daughter. His son, Bertrand II, assumed control of the throne. Bertrand II, 564 Pa, 601 Pa. Bertrand II assumed the throne in 564 Pa after his father was beheaded at court by Baron Georg Undrigen. Bertrand II's first order was to have Undrigen drawn and quartered before his father's body was even cold. The Undrigen house and many other noble houses, who had been displeased with Bertrand I, cited this as a violation of the law, being as Georg was given no trial. The Witan backed the Undrigen house and the country was quickly embroiled in a civil war between the loyalists who served Bertrand and the insurrectionists who backed House Undrigen. The bloody feud raged from the start of Bertrand's reign until its very end, and he became known as Bertrand the Bloody as a result. Bertrand II died of health complications from advancing age in 601 Pa, and his son Bertrand III assumed the throne. Bertrand III, 601 Pa, 616 Pa. Bertrand III assumed control of the Prythonian throne following the death of his father, Bertrand II, in 601 Pa. Where his father had tried to fight the dissentious nobles conventionally, Bertrand III tried a different tactic. He employed a large number of assassins, mercenaries, and brigands and focused his attention on the common folk. Enemy after enemy was forced to capitulate to Bertrand's rule as their own people, disheartened by attacks on their families and livelihoods, refused to serve or even openly revolted. It was this tactic that led to the king becoming known as Bertrand the Bully. Bertrand III levied harsh taxes against those who had previously opposed him and was largely regarded as an evil and vicious king. One settlement in particular, Edelich, refused to cooperate with the king, even to the point of driving out their own liege. Bertrand sent several waves of troops and agents against this resistance, but their leader, Tarik Miller, and his men killed them all. Eventually, King Bertrand III decided to handle Miller himself, and gathered his best loyal nobles and their personal guards and rode into Edelich in 616 Pa. Unbeknownst to Bertrand, however, many of his loyal nobles had grown tired of his greed and depravity, and instead of helping him, they moved to trap his forces between their own and Miller's, resulting in a massacre of the king's men. Miller executed the king and his loyal nobles by piling stones on them until they expired, and Edelich was thereafter known as Stonesville. Bertrand IV, 616 Pa, 652 Pa. Bertrand IV ascended to the throne of Prythonia following the death of his father in 616 Pa. He was immediately overcome with fear that the dissentious elements of the kingdom would come for him and began striking out at perceived threats with as much might as he could muster. The nobles who had betrayed his father were all dead by year's end, along with their families. As his reign progressed, Bertrand V became even more paranoid and would frequently purge his inner circle, killing his advisors, his chamberlains, and even his kitchen staff. On at least 2 occasions, he had his wife put to death for a perceived infidelity. With each such action, his people became increasingly unhappy with him. Unable to accept this as his fault, he continued to ramp up the reprisals, and his people soon came to call him Bertrand the Bitter. Bertrand dissolved the Witan and either murdered or drove out almost every noble in his kingdom. As Prythonia collapsed into poverty and ruin, he began turning on the common folk, burning farms where he blamed the farmers for a famine, and killing shipping merchants for losing ships in storms, among other, equally inane things. His own son fled to Galatia in fear that his father would turn against him. By the time Bertrand IV died of old age in 652 PA, he was fully consumed by his madness. His last decree was that he would leave Prythonia in the hands of peasants and foreigners before he would let his unworthy son or nobles rule it. Captain Traeger, leader of the Lion Guard and highest-ranking official remaining, took these words to heart. This brings us up to present day. Who will be the next king? Will the great sword Khalid Bolg ever return? Is Albion entirely populated by undead skeletons now? Will Bertrand V ever be seen again? Will Thanadar just fuck off and mind its own business? So many questions still to be answered.